All right, let's not get this twisted. We wouldn't be taking the Los Angeles Clippers seriously if they didn't have Kawhi Leonard. But they wouldn't be title contenders if they didn't have Paul George. That's all I'm saying. Paul George's addition there makes them that much harder of an opponent, and just because of that, just because of his presence making the Clippers that much better of a team, I think Paul George is elite. If we're talking about this upcoming season, Paul George can be a very big player in what is to come this upcoming season. And because he's a very big player, I believe he deserves to be recognized as elite. How you guys doing? It is Monday, July 20th, 2020 out here in this quarantine, and I'm doing an elite profile on Paul George, who I initially wrote down, but I guess I just skipped over when I had everyone down when I was trying to make sure I had everyone's elite profile and I didn't have Paul George's. I guess I just have to redo it. So, but before I get into it, if you're unaware of who Paul George is a 30-year-old wing, small forward-ish. He stands at about 6'8", 220. And if I could describe his offense, I could say he works incredibly well off the ball, but he can get you some buckets where need be. And on defense, he plays incredible face. I would say he's a very underrated defender for how good of an offensive player he is. A lot of players tend to overlook the fact that he's been named to the all-defensive first team twice. Once when he was on OKC and once when he was on Indiana. So, I mean, on two different teams, all while being an all-star the whole way. I remember when he broke his leg too. That was pretty sad, but I'm really glad to see that Paul George was able to bounce back and recover. Now he has the chance to go back home to LA and try to seek his own path to a championship. I'm curious to see if the Los Angeles Clippers do win, Paul George will go down in the history books, and I really mean it. Just to get into a little background, Paul George is, like I said, he's a 30-year-old small forward coming out of Palmdale. He was originally recruited to go to Fresno State, so he went to go play 2 years of ball at Fresno State. And in 2 years, I guess he was epic enough to have his jersey retired by the school after he finished second team All-WAC in 2010. Long story short, he was a good enough prospect to get drafted in the lottery. He was picked 10th overall in the 2010 NBA draft by the Indiana Pacers, where he would start his career in 2010. That's where Paul George would really take off. In his first season, he would go on to start 19 of the 61 games he would play in. And in the 20 minutes that he would play, he would average 8 points, 3.5 rebounds, an assist, and a steal a game, shooting 45% from the field, 30% from three, and 76% from the free throw line, all in his age 20 season. That year, the Indiana Pacers would finish 8th in the East, and they would lose in the first round to the Bulls. But that was their first time in the playoffs after a 4-year drought of not making it, just missing the playoffs. But Paul George's first year back, he got him back in. He helped them be 5 wins better than they were the previous year, and it got them in. And this was 2 years after Danny Granger won the Most Improved Player of the Year. So this team was slowly building into an Eastern Conference Titan, at least. In 2011-2012, in Paul George's second season, in his age 21 season, Paul George he started in all 66 games he played in, as he finished averaging 12 points, 5.6 rebounds, 2.4 assists, 1.6 steals, shooting 44% from the field, 38% from three, 80% from the free throw line, not really receiving any mention other than being all rookie second team the year prior, but that year, the Indiana Pacers jumped from the 8th seed to the 3rd seed, where they would beat the Magic in the first round, and they would lose in the semifinals to the Heat. And the Pacers were slowly and surely becoming and building themselves into another Titan, another title contender, possibly, with Roy Hibbert down low, and they still had Danny Granger, who was playing as well as he was. In 2012-13, that's when Paul George would enter his age 22 season, where Paul George would win the Most Improved Player of the Year, where he would average 17.4 points, 7.6 rebounds, 4.1 assists. He'd average 1.8 steals, the most he'd averaged up until that point, shooting 41% from the field, 36% from three, and he'd shoot 81% from the free throw line. And he made his first All-Star game in his 3rd year in the league. So, 3 years in, he had gone from being second team All-WAC to being a professional All-Star, which is mad impressive. And then after that, his career would get even better. But following that, the 12-13 season would result in the Pacers finishing third yet again in the East for the second year in a row. They would end up beating the Hawks in the first round in six. They would beat the Knicks in the semis in six with Carmelo Anthony. And then they'd end up losing in the conference finals to the Miami Heat in 7 games. That was probably the farthest they'd ever gotten, but they would come back to face the Heat once again. But that was the last time they took it to 7. They didn't take it to 7 the next time, but that's the furthest they'd gotten with Paul George in Indiana. I'll kind of take some note of that because they had the Miami Heat to Game 7 in the Eastern Conference Finals, just to show you how strong that Indiana Pacers team was. And Paul George was the MIP on that team. He was slowly and surely growing into being one of the best players on that team. 2013-14, Paul George decides to come back in his second year in Indiana. He was named an all-star as he averaged 22 points per game, 6.8 rebounds, 3.5 assists, 1.9 steals, shooting 42% from the field, 36% from three. That year, Paul George would go on to be named to the All-Defensive First Team for the second time in his career. He'll get named to the All-NBA Third Team for the second year in a row. He was named to his second All-Star team. After that, Paul George was slowly yet surely growing into being one of the next NBA players on deck. Because, at that point, that's 4 seasons in, and he's already recognized twice for his defense and his offense. The very next year, 2014-15, Paul George would deal with a leg injury, and he wouldn't play the entire season. Until the very end, he tried to come back and play the last 6, and he averaged 15 minutes, averaging 8 points a game, the likes. But 2014, he completely sat out, missed that season. The Pacers missed the playoffs that year completely. And Paul George would come back in 2015-16 in his age 25 season, and he would put up another all-star season for the ages as he made his third NBA All-Third team, recognized himself as at least a top 15 player in the NBA, a consistent one at that. He was named to the All-Defensive Second Team for the second time in his career. And Paul George, he was still putting in the work that he really needed to do. He started all 81 games that season. He finished averaging 23 points per game this year, the most he'd averaged up until that point. He averaged 7 rebounds, 4.1 assists, 1.9 steals. He was shooting 42% from the field, 37% from three. He was shooting 86% from the line as, he brought the Pacers back into the playoffs in his very first year back, showing that he was back. And then the Pacers with the 7th seed, they would end up losing in the first round to the Raptors 4-3. That would lead to Paul George playing his very next season in Indiana. His next season in Indiana would be his last one in 2016-17. That year, he would finish by starting all 75 games in a season where the Pacers finished 7th in the East for the second year in a row. They finished winning 42 games that season, and in 2016-17, Paul George was named to his 4th NBA All-Star team. Wasn't necessarily named to a defensive team, but he'd scored the most points he'd ever scored at that point. He averaged 23.7 points per game, averaging 6.6 rebounds, 3.3 assists, 1.6 steals on the season. He would shoot 46% from the field, 39% from three, and 90% from the free throw line. What else more can you ask? Paul George was really kind of that guy. But following that year in Indiana, they lost in the first round. They got swept in the first round by the Cavs. The year that they went back to the finals. So, there was nothing else for Paul George in Indiana. So, when there was a chance for OKC to make a trade, they traded Victor Oladipo and Domantas Sabonis for the chance to get Paul George and OKC for the 2017-18 season for a chance to battle against Steph Curry and battle against the Houston Rockets. So, they were able to sign Paul George with Russell Westbrook and OKC to try to be a contender out in the West. His very first season out in OKC in 27-18, he would start 79 games in a season where the Oklahoma City Thunder would eventually end up finishing 4th in the West with a 48-34 record. That year, Paul George would end up making his 3rd consecutive All-Star. He'd be an All-Star for the 5th time in 6 years. He would go on to average 36 minutes a game, scoring 21.9 points per game, 5.7 rebounds, 3.3 assists, 2 steals on the season. The first time he'd ever averaged 2 steals a game in OKC, shooting 43% from the field, 40% from 3-point line, and 82% from the line. In 2018, he was named, like I said, to the All-NBA third team for the 4th time in his career. That was the last time he was named to the All-NBA, the NBA All-Third team. But yeah, that was the one time when he wasn't in Indiana, which he was recognized as at least a top 15 player in the league. This would turn into his 2018-19 season, which I believe is his best season up to date, where in OKC he would start all 77 games in a season where they would finish 6th in the West. In the previous year, they got bounced by the Jazz in 6th. But in the 4th year under Billy Donovan, Paul George's 2nd year there, they would finish with 49 wins, with the 6th best record in the West. That season, Paul George was eventually named to the all-defensive first team for the 2nd time in his career, and he was named to the All-NBA first team for the first time ever in his career. That season, he would go on to average 28 points. He would average 8.2 rebounds, 4.1 rebounds, 2.2 steals. He would lead the league in steals for the only time he's ever done it in his career. It was the 2nd time he's averaged 2.2, or he's averaged 2 steals a game. He went on to shoot 44% from the field, 39% from the 3-point line. He shot 84% from the line. I mean, that's 2 years ago. That was the last full season he played. And following that season on the OKC Thunder, they got bounced by the Trailblazers in 5. Following that season, Paul George, as a free agent, decided he wasn't going to come back to OKC. He decided to go play for the Los Angeles Clippers this season. He decided he had a chance to come play for the Los Angeles Lakers. Decided to play in LA, and Kawhi came with him, and now they're a whole duo out in LA. And in the 42 games he's been playing with the Clippers, he wasn't selected to an All-Star game, but he still averaged 21 points. He averaged 5.7 rebounds, 3.9 assists, 1.3 steals, shooting 43.2% from the field. He's shooting 39.9% from 3, 88.8% from the free throw line. And right now the Clippers are sitting at the 2nd spot in the West. They're sitting 5.5 games behind the Clippers. And I like the current situation the Los Angeles Clippers are currently in, with their starting lineup of Patrick Beverley, Paul George, Kawhi, Marcus Morris, and Ivica Zubac, or depending on if Montrezl Harrell's in the game. I like the combination of Paul George and Kawhi Leonard. They're both the same age, and I imagine they have a good amount of chemistry working off one another, and their skills are very complementary. When I look at Paul George, I still see him as a 30-year-old wing who has 6 All-Stars to his name and still has a lot more to do. He still has a lot more elite years left. If you ask me right now if I consider him elite, I'd say yes, because we still consider the Clippers a finals favorite. And it's not just because of Kawhi Leonard. It's because Paul George is there too. And there are a lot of other teams with 2 All-Stars, but you chose this specific team. And Paul George is that guy. He's still the same guy that scored 28 points a game literally 2 seasons ago. Once the season starts back up, I really hope people don't just forget how OP Paul George is at basketball. But with that said, I really appreciate you guys listening to all 13, 14 minutes of my piece. I think Paul George deserves to be recognized as an elite wing, even to his name right now. In the seasons that he's played 10 seasons. He has 6 He's been named to 6 All-Star teams. He's been named to the All-NBA first team once in 2019. He was named to the All-NBA third team 4 separate times in his career. He was named to the All-Defensive first team twice, the All-Defensive second team twice. He was the steals leader in 2019. He was the most improved player in 2013. And all the way back before that, he was a member of the NBA All-Rookie second team. He jumped from the Pacers. And when the Pacers nothing was going there, he tried to go to a championship winner in OKC. But now he's on the Clippers to try to be on a team that actually competes in the finals, or at least at that level. With that said, I appreciate everything, and I implore you to watch Paul George. If you ever get a chance, he's wearing number 13 on the Clippers, hence his nickname PG-13. And with that, I believe I've said my piece. Paul George is an elite wing. He should be recognized as such. And you've heard my piece. Thanks for hearing me out. Peace out.